Good morning, everybody, and thanks for being here. I need to thank American University for hosting this. It's great to be among, I guess, my tribe. And thank GAP and FIC and Amanda and Lewis and Jason Zuckerman is right here, who've all helped me in the past 5 years. Since I whistleblowed, and led to a good outcome for me, which just happened. I'm very grateful for that. So my old job is ending thanks to a settlement that was worked out through my friends here. So I'm going to be a little shameless. I'm looking for a new job in a few months. So if anybody has a job for a former research veterinarian, I'll be available. So I'm going to talk about maybe the 10,000-foot view of my, not the details of my experience, but sort of how it maybe integrates with all the different groups that are here. I'm going to steal the word intersectionality. By intersectionality, I mean I'll call it sort of a pathological industrial agriculture, animal agriculture, and plant and crop agriculture food system. And that means that what I mean by that is that some of the pathology of the system is greater than some of the parts. So this is actually a place, the Middle Research Center is kind of middle of nowhere, south central Nebraska, and I worked there at that center for 25 years. So this is a brief history. So I grew up in the suburban Twin Cities in Chicago, majored in biology and track in college, did the Peace Corps for 3 years in West Africa, went to Illinois, got my DVM, my PhD there. Then I went to work for USDA, and then on the same location, they have, University of Nebraska has a sort of a small teaching research center. So I worked for there also, on the same campus, but for the university. And the MARC is run, Research Center is called MARC. I'm going to use that acronym. That's what it means. They run the place, the institute jointly. Then I had my whistleblowing experience. Was in limbo for about a year and a half. Was transferred to Lincoln. Was there for 4 years. I'm leaving there soon. So the whole experience from the time I kind of started to where I'm at now is 12 years. It's been a long journey. So industrial animal agriculture it's kind of like the Olympic model, further, faster, farther. It's bigger, faster, more, cheaper. And it's all about increasing your outputs and decreasing your inputs. Making cheap and plentiful food, I would say cheap, expensive food, feeding the world, it's a mythology, and the system relies on those ends justifying the means. And the question is, can we do better than that as a society? So here's my little diagram of what I'm going to call intersectionality, which actually came about from about 4 years ago. FIC, Amanda introduced me to this concept that I'm sort of involved on the animal welfare side, but it's actually part of a much bigger whole, which I didn't know. I was in my little silo. And I think that's where all of us in this room, whether in labor or welfare like I am, or food safety, or even rural demise is a huge thing. In the Great Plains, with big ag is really wiping out the small towns. But they're all actually very closely related. Okay, does anybody know what this is a picture of? It's a feedlot, which is, they're all over the Great Plains. This Mishka Hemmer makes art out of this and sells art. He takes satellite pictures and composites them. So each of these little squares, those are cattle. Each of those is about 200 pens. And in the past, 50 years ago, that would have been one farm. So a feedlot represents dozens or hundreds of farms. I've been in a feedlot up to 100,000 animals in it. So you divide by 200, so many farms that would have been the last generation with more conventional farming. And in this system, this big colorful thing on the right, upper right, in the northeast corner, that's the waste. So you do have issues of animal welfare because it's a very abnormal system for cattle. You have food safety issues, which I worked on as a researcher. There's all kinds of salmonella and E. coli in those systems. You've got probably undocumented workers working, taking care of those animals. You have global warming issues related. Animals are both a victim and a driver of the global warming. So they're all part of that system. So this is actually this was my research lab. I worked in feedlots mostly for most of my career. I worked on a specific, and you can see basically you have urine pools and fecal mountains, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, lots of drugs, thanks to my profession, diminished rural quality of life. And my research job was actually how do I get rid of salmonella and pathogenic E. coli in this environment? You think about it, it's a pretty tough deal when you're swimming in feces, right? So I basically tried that during my research career for 2 decades. It didn't work. I finally realized I'm trying to divide by 0. You really can't do it. Given this system, you really can't do it. But I tried, and I failed. So this is one bacteria I worked on a lot. Maybe my focus was E. coli 157. It's also called hamburger disease. Popped out in 1983. So it doesn't hurt animals. It gets in them, they defecate it. It pollutes the environment along with their waste. It gets into our food, so we get feces on food. Living in a filthy environment, it's not the animal's fault. And then it can cause serious disease in kids, kidney failure. In fact, my niece almost died from this a few years back. So again, this was my research. I tried everything. I spent about $13 million of taxpayer dollars with the USDA. Not much came out of that because of the system. You can't fix the system. So this little map shows where the red is where the Meadowham Research Center is. I lived in Hastings, Nebraska, about 25 miles away. And then Lincoln, Nebraska is the other dot. And this is true, actually, from the Animal Welfare Act. No animal experiment doesn't matter if it's ridiculous, useless, or painful. It's not illegal. I'll give some examples of that. So I worked at the Meadowham Research Center, either for USDA, for University of Nebraska, for 25 years. It's the world's largest research center. They have about 36,000 animals in the springtime. Less now, they sell some. It's 55 square miles, which is about almost the size of 3 Manhattan Islands. To give you an idea, it's a huge place. Its mission is red meat production efficiency. Decrease inputs, increase outputs, meaning more muscle equals meat. Has a budget of $27 million per year. So they spent about maybe 1.4 by now, $1.5 billion. Cattle, swine, and sheep. So I'll give just some examples of things that happened there. They had a project called the Twinning Project, where they selected, they do a lot of genetics work there. They selected for cattle to have twins over 30 years. They got the normal cow twinning rate is 1%. They got it up to about 50%. But there's negative sequela with that. Cows are selected to have one single calf, so they get difficulty giving birth. The twins get sick. The cows get mastitis. The cows are also, the female cows are masculinized if they're a twin. So they abandoned it in 2013 after 2,000 years of $100 million. There's no market for it. Farmers actually cull cows that have twins. They don't want them. So I don't know what the logic of this was. The idea was you get more meat with more animals. And it was a predictable fail. But it went on, it was almost perpetual research. Another example, they had a project called double muscled cows. And they found a gene mutation in the myostatin gene, which shuts off muscle growth. And with that gene not functioning, the muscles continue to grow. They never stop growing. So you get Arnold Schwarzenegger like animals, and the meat is like leather. It's very tough meat. Again, the same thing. It causes a lot of negative sequela dystocia. You can imagine animals like this don't handle stress very well. They overheat. Global warming is not good for these animals. Poor calf viability. Abandoned after many years, millions of dollars, no market, predictable fail. There's a theme here. You're going to see. Easy care sheep. The idea here was it's expensive. The sheep industry in the U.S. is tanking. It's going extinct. 55 million 50 years ago, now about 3 million breeding animals now. And so they said, well, maybe we can make wild sheep, like cut out the human labor, and let's make the domestic sheep, rewild them so we can leave them alone and they won't need any human assistance. So that was the idea, to genetically select for animals. Here's the basic experiment outline. Had about 1,500 ewes per year, which gave birth to 2,500 to 3,000 ewes. You put them out in open pasture, middle of nowhere, and watch what happens, see who survives. So normally in a system like this, about 5% would die. I actually got some FOIA documents, and it was about 40% of the lambs will die within the first 2 months or so. So it's kind of predictable what's going to happen. Take a domestic animal, treat it like a wild animal, probably not going to work out too well. So this basically who ran this experiment was Darwin. He was the principal investigator. Take away housing, take away assisted lambing. Actually, in the experiment, the shepherds, even if they wanted to, could not intervene, just see what happens. So what happens? Oh, here's an example. I actually was with the reporter when whistleblower. This was actually, I took the New York Times reporter who I work with, and this was a picture I took during that visit. Lambs get abandoned, they get killed by a coyote or eaten by a coyote or starved to death, etc. These were also pictures I took when I was with Michael Moss. So the lambs starve to death, they die of exposure, they die because they can't give birth properly, no one helps them give birth, they're stillborn, or a coyote gets them. You can guess which one that is. So this really was kind of senseless. I would say it was senseless science. It was violent, plausible to think, or hubris to think you could convert a domestic animal into a rural animal. It was obviously an animal well-being fail. And it was a scientific and financial disaster because it's hard to get the exact numbers. We probably spent about $17 million on this. It went from 2000, set around 2000, and may still be going on, but it's about ending now. So there was not a single scientific paper came out of this. Hard to, given the failure rate. No market or demand, predictable fail. See the theme here? So that's sort of the system. Just to give it, there are a lot of things, but those are 3 examples. So a little bit about I'll call it my truth-telling story. So I was a part of this system for a long time. In fact, one of the legitimate questions thrown at me after I whistleblower was, why did you wait so long? And the reason was, I didn't see anything wrong with the system because I was a part of it, and I saw nothing wrong with it. And then I sort of had this slow conversion process for many reasons. Animal welfare is part of it, and I want to go into that a little bit. So it took me, unlike St. Paul, I didn't fall off a horse and see the world in a different way. It took me a long time, probably over about 8 to 10 years, where I slowly saw the world with a different lens. So I kind of went from this journey from being an atheist, everything's fine with industrial animal ag, or industrial ag in general, to kind of from ignorance and being not very mindful. And then I became more of an agnostic, maybe there's maybe I need to reconsider. And then eventually I crossed that line in the sand, and then became a whistleblower, and now I'm an activist. And a big part of it, I have several daughters. And we had this, during the time, of course, they were vegans or vegetarians at different points. Some still are. We'd have this argument, I make my living through meat, so I'd say, we've got to eat meat. and they would say, no, we don't. It was kind of a friendly debate, went back and forth. But the bottom line is that they ended up converting me, not them. So a legitimate issue is you can't just complain, right? You have to offer a solution. So what my daughter did for about 6 or 7, from about 2010 to a couple of years ago, she started a small community-supported ag in the middle of big ag. It was small organic farms. She had, in a town of 25,000, she had about 80 customers, 22 weeks supply food, plus did the local farmers markets. So it was on the edge of town in the small acreage that my former wife still owns, but she used heritage plants and animals, pastured livestock, very diverse, sustainable. She had raised flowers to support the bees. Her honey brand, I always liked it, was called Not Tonight Honey. And so she also did livestock, raised heritage pigs, Berkshire pigs, and I still eat some meat, much less than I used to, but the meat, it's actually red. It's not white meat. It actually has much more flavor to it. And same thing with the poultry. She didn't cull her birds. Her birds, some of her birds lived for 7 or 8 years. lots of varieties. So I learned a lot from that system. So I learned that there are alternatives to that big ag system that are actually better in quality, hard to get the quantity. So why did I sort of convert? Thank you. The welfare abuse that I saw, my own complicity, my own research. I realized science couldn't solve those big ag problems. I tried for a long time, didn't work. My daughter's example, in our town, we had, town of Hastings, where I used to lived there for 30-something years. We had from the nitrates, from fertilizing corn, and from livestock waste, we got nitrates in the water, and it also solubilized uranium, so radioactive water with nitrates in it, $46 million to fix it, economic externalities. And even honeybees, I was trying to get honeybees legal in the city, and they wouldn't approve it until I brought a document, a paper, clipping from a paper that said it was legal in New York City, and then they were shamed into legalizing bees, honeybees in the city. So my little whistleblower arc, this is a common thing. You get discovered. Now this little chicken there, that's me. I was a chicken sugar honey iced tea at different levels during this time, and that's the little puddle there. So, I mean, it's gone down. You can see that it's gotten smaller, but so you go through this process, you decide to do it, you finally act, but you got activation energy. That's the hard part. I sat on this for probably 6 years before I did something, and it's been 6 years since, so it's a very long journey. So it came out in the Times on the front page, and you can still see this. It's like a long piece, more than 5,000 words. You can see that if you want to look at it. But it's very asymmetric. I had two large organizations. I felt like a little mosquito, and mosquitoes tend to get swatted when they bite. And they have lots of money, and you don't. They have lots of lawyers, and you don't. I had some allies, and that was very, very helpful. But I had visits, or one long visit from the FBI, lots of police follow me when I drive or interview me, things like that. And this was actually, I hid out. The police, the University of Nebraska police were trying to find me, and I was on administrative leave at the time. My lawyer said, you don't have to tell me where you're at, so I hid out at my friend's farm, middle of nowhere, for several months. This was my hideout. So I'm running out of time here. So this is my new life is changing. I was a mosquito. I'm still a mosquito, but a little bit bigger in version 2. My bite, I can take up more blood. And it's harder to swat me, too. So what happened where I was at, all my goals were decreasing animal abuse at MARC. That happened. And not only at MARC, but all the USDA labs. Now they have IACUC instituted, unannounced welfare audits, and 2 of my master's students are now the 2 veterinarians there, which is kind of a fateful thing. And because of that, I don't think the USDA would acknowledge it, but they actually have better animal welfare. That gives you better research findings. You get healthier animals, and that's better use of tax dollars. And also, I've been involved in lots of advocacy groups, volunteer, was in a documentary, which is a fantastic experience. And then even more recently, this is my mosquito bite part, I just worked with a group called White Coat Waste Project, and we shut down for the first time. It was a USDA research project using cats, and they did a lot of crazy things. Went on for 37 years, spent $23 million, $650,000 per year. And one thing they were doing, they were buying cats and dogs from China, killing them, taking out their brains, their hearts, their tongue, and something else, and ship those parts to the US and then feed them to cats, cannibal cats. So we prepared this 14-page report in March and gave it to members of Congress, and then 2 weeks later, the life-saving research by USDA was shut down. So I do have a little bit of a bite. I'm a fellow at Harvard now, and I would never think I would be there. And this is my last slide. This is my my sister-in-law. And I'm trying to get her to talk to Lewis. Anyway, I'm done.